Opportunity comes with opposition. But our job is to focus on God and His vision.
Timing is everything in so many aspects in life.
You eventually have to believe in something because there are things that even modern science today cannot really explain.
When we take on His vision, we will begin to care for the things God cares for. I am Dr. Erez Soref. I was born and raised in the heart of Israel, but I never heard the gospel message until, on a journey abroad, my eyes were opened to the Jewish Messiah. From that point, my life has been dedicated to bringing this gospel back to my people Israel, equipping them to reach Israel and the world. Together, as Jews and Gentiles, we are one in Messiah, one for Israel. The walls of the old city of Jerusalem, they give this feeling that the city is special, set apart from the rest of the world, a city on a hill, like a crown set upon the head of the earth. This city is set apart for a special purpose. And for every purpose God sets, whether for this city or for you, He always opens a door of opportunity to pursue that purpose. We have been following the steps of Nehemiah. And today, we will see that God also set him apart for a special purpose, just as He sets you apart. And when God defines His purpose, He provides us the opportunity to jump into that purpose. Our question today is, what is your opportunity as we walk the walls with Nehemiah? Nehemiah lived in Shushan, the capital city of the Persian Empire, 1,000 miles from Jerusalem. He had heard a report about Jewish captives that returned to rebuild the holy city. The walls were broken down, surrounding enemies were attacking, temple worship was interrupted. And hearing this report, Nehemiah was burdened. He spent 4 months mourning with God, having the imprint of God's heart pressed upon his heart, receiving vision and praying into that vision. Nehemiah was the high official in the Persian court, the cupbearer. All the wine that was brought to the king, Nehemiah would taste, first to make sure it was acceptable, and then to ensure it was not poisoned. The king may have had many enemies from without and within, many with motivation to assassinate the king. So the position of cupbearer was very important, coming with a high responsibility and deep trust from the king. Nehemiah would have known every detail of the court, the winery staff, the approved cups and servants, a keen sense of awareness if anything or anyone seemed off. In turn, the king would also notice if anything about his cupbearer wasn't quite right. Nehemiah's position came with special favor in the court. He had personal access to the king. He heard conversations that no one else did. It was almost a friendship, a confidant, which gave the opportunity for influence. So after 4 months of mourning and praying for Jerusalem, Nehemiah came to work not looking his cheerful self, and the king noticed. He asked him, "Why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick?" A piercing question. Was the king suspicious of Nehemiah? He could have had him killed with one snap of his finger for any and every reason. It was dangerous to enter the court with a bad demeanor. Scripture writes that Nehemiah was afraid, yet he spoke the truth. "Let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" What a bold response to the king of the known world. This wasn't just an off-the-cuff emotional answer. Nehemiah had been shaped by a burden and soaked in prayer. He knew what he was saying. The king didn't recoil at Nehemiah's audacity. Instead, He answered, "What are you requesting?" This was the critical moment. Nehemiah had been praying for this opening with the king. He had incredible favor. In Esther's story, we see that no one could appear before the Persian king unless they were summoned. Not even the queen. Yet there was Nehemiah with special access. And here was the king asking Nehemiah what he could do for him. Nehemiah could have used this favor for practically anything he desired. But he had been captivated by a vision. He had been conditioned in God's presence. And this was the opportunity he had prayed for. What is your opportunity? Leonard Ravenhill said, "The opportunity of a lifetime needs to be seized during the lifetime of the opportunity." It's one thing to have a burden, but it's another thing to be ready when the opportunity comes. Favor is wasted if you're not prepared when the door opens. Nehemiah stood before the king with an opportunity, a moment of favor to ask him any request. After praying a quick, silent prayer, he boldly asked the king for 7 practical things. First, that he would be sent to Jerusalem. Second, he asked permission to rebuild the city. Third, he requested time off to oversee the building. Next, he requested the king write official letters allowing him safe passage for travel, and another letter to grant him timber for Jerusalem's gates. Then he requested all the supplies needed to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And lastly, supplies to build a house for himself. What if you found yourself standing before someone that had the ability to make your vision come true? Would you be able to articulate that need? Nehemiah had spent time having this vision formed in him. He wasn't caught off guard by the moment. He knew exactly what was needed practically to fulfill this vision. He was prepared. But even more important than practical preparation, Nehemiah had spent time with God. He was not shaken by intimidation when he stood before the king. He had spent time before the King of Kings. And as he had quickly and silently prayed in the moment, he was inviting the presence of that king into the throne room. Nehemiah writes that the king of Persia granted his entire request list because the hand of his God was upon him. He had been seeking the things that were on God's heart. He had taken on God's passion in a personal way. He cared about what mattered to God. And because Nehemiah worked to fulfill God's will, he received God's blessing. Notice that the divine help was not just spiritual, it was material. We often separate the spiritual from the material world, but God does not. Nehemiah and the Israelites would work with stone, cement, and tools of iron to accomplish God's purposes. They would partner with God to accomplish a very physical task with very supernatural help. That's why Nehemiah needed to ask for his specific physical needs. It demonstrated faith that God would really accomplish this vision. Opportunity is favor. Taking the opportunity is a step of faith. It's not something you have to try to make happen. The moment will come. Will you be prepared? Are you taking the time in the secret place, receiving God's heart? Are you preparing practically, in faith? Be prepared for your moment. Stand in faith that God will be with you, that He will provide everything to make His vision come to pass. Nehemiah had his opportunity. The king allowed him to go to Jerusalem to accomplish his mission. He even made him the new governor over Judea. So Nehemiah made the long journey from Persia to Jerusalem. The risky part, asking the king favor, was over, but the hard part was just beginning. When he arrived in Jerusalem, he didn't start announcing his plan right away and throwing around his new authority. Opportunity requires us to work with prudence. Prudence is acting with the right timing, even when things seem urgent. Shalom Sagiv, thank you so much for taking the time to come to the studio and chat with me today.
Shalom.
And you are a former commander and field operator in the Israeli security services. And so I wanted to chat with you about Nehemiah, and specifically the time that Nehemiah began his mission to build the walls of Jerusalem, to defend Jerusalem. And he started with undercover night reconnaissance. Why is it so important to gather all this information in the defense world before you actually do something?
Yeah, I think that Nehemiah was a highly strategically person that plans everything way before. Even to take it for the time that he was sitting in Persia.
In Persia.
With the king. Think about it. First of all, he was in a very comfortable place. He created a situation that the king himself will send him to Israel and will send him to Jerusalem. I mean, that's, as the way that I see that, that's not a coincidence. I mean, he planned that.
So this period, the initial period of planning, thinking, getting the information, moving slowly, not rushing, is something that is very important.
That's everything is about that. It's to understand, first of all, to understand what do you want to achieve? What is the end game? And then you are starting to deal with the how to do that. He didn't go directly and started to, the king sent him. He can come and he can
Absolutely.
say, okay, this is what we will do.
Yeah, he's the new governor.
Yeah.
I mean, he can give orders.
But he
didn't do it.
He proved his leadership by actually going with his people, or first of all, alone, to smell and to understand the area, creating for himself a full picture of what is the situation and then to act.
Now, we see that Nehemiah didn't act right away. That seems very contrary, because, God tells you something, you just go and do it, and you do it right away. Why is timing so critical in leadership, the actual timing, choosing the right timing?
Timing is everything, not just in so many aspects in life. Patient and understanding when to act is I think, in a way, will determine the resolution, the end game.
In those kind of defense missions, I'm thinking about Nehemiah. I mean, he's trying to collect the information, to analyze the mood of the people, to see where Jerusalem is. I mean, he's already there, the king has already sent him. From your experience, what can happen if you have the wrong information, or you don't have all the information that you need?
Information, right information is everything. Think about it. It's like to go to a mission with your eyes closed if you don't have the right information. We can see that Nehemiah understood that a long time ago. He acted like that, and he gathered a lot of information before of even approaching anyone in Israel or even in Persia.
We read, we hear so much now, and even in Christian evangelical circles around the world, even in the United States, we hear about voices that are very anti-Israel, anti-Semitic. How can we, and especially our viewers, as Christians and people that are believers in the Bible, how can we prepare for what's ahead?
I don't think that someone saw that coming in this scale. It brings us to another front. All right, Israel was fighting 7 fronts. But there is another front, the 8th front, the front of PR, of communication, of controlling the narrative, and we see the outcome. We didn't even define that as a front. But this front is not just against Israel.
Absolutely.
This front is it's not the question of fighting anti-Semitism. This is a well-organized attack against the Western civilization, against Judeo-Christian values. Amazing how, woke progressive movement, together with new communism strategies and the radical Islam coming together to one camp, using social media. And the outcome, the results, is what we are seeing right now. And I think for something like that, by the way, the only way to confront that is a strong alliance between Jews and Christians. And I think we are in a stage of still analyzing the problem and just gathering the forces and understanding that this is a front. But we need to act fast over there.
Sagiv, I want to thank you for coming today. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
And we see the importance of strategically thinking, planning, taking the time in prayer to do what God is calling us. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here.
Nehemiah arrived to Jerusalem discreetly. He made careful observations before he tried to start leading the people in the vision. He writes that he got up late at night in secret with a few men going around to the different gates of the city. Before he told anyone about the vision, he gathered details and logistics on what needed to be done. He inspected all the gates and walls and meticulously recorded the problems. His care for the city reminds us of the Psalms about Jerusalem. Walk about Zion, go around her, number her towers, consider well her ramparts, go through her citadels, that you may tell the next generation that this is God, our God forever and ever. He will guide us forever. This is the same prophetic pattern that Ezekiel acted out when God told him to measure the gates and walls of Jerusalem. The command to inspect the city is echoed again to John in the book of Revelation, the New Jerusalem. There's something holy about this place. Yes, to be here is awe-inspiring. But the holiness and awe we see proclaimed in the Psalms and prophets truly centers on the one who dwells in her midst. Likewise, what God is building in you is holy because He is at the center of that work. When we get the opportunity to start walking out God's vision, it's critical not to shrink back in fear when the opportunity comes. But it's just as important not to jump in without thinking. Nehemiah was thorough, meticulous. He cared for the details. And those details reflect Nehemiah's faith. You don't make specific plans for something you don't plan to do. These plans, birthed in prayer, invite the author of creation to write in the details. The God who knows how many hairs are on our head, He cares for every little thing. And when we take on His vision, we will begin to care for the things God cares for. Discover how you can pick up bricks and build with God. Order our new book today, Walking the Walls with Nehemiah, and awaken God's vision in your life. Available in print, Audible, and Kindle. After 3 days surveying the city in secrecy, Nehemiah finally called up the leaders in Jerusalem to announce his vision. He said, "You see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem, so that we may no longer suffer derision." And I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words the king had spoken to me. And they said, "Let us rise up and build." So they strengthened their hands for the good work. The time for action had finally come, and the people jumped on board the vision. This is a thrilling moment when people recognize the call of God and rally to join in the work. And while it's appropriate to rejoice and press on with this momentum, we need to remember that the enemy will also take this opportunity to attack. With Nehemiah, just as people began to rally to the vision, two men rose up to oppose the work of God, Sanballat and Tobiah. Whenever God's people march on with God's plan, the representatives of God's enemy attempt to block, choke, and stop that movement. Not surprisingly, this story is a picture of what's happening today with God's people, Israel. We saw the miracle of our nation born in a day. We see the land and economy flourishing for the first time in centuries. Over the past 100 years, millions of Jewish people have returned home. Yet, we have faced constant opposition from our neighbors and the world. There is more scrutiny and criticism of Israel than any other nation on earth. In today's climate, as we see anti-Semitism rise again throughout the world, we must recognize the closer we come to the fulfillment of God's ultimate plan, the more we will see the opposition of the enemy working against God's people. Today we're talking with Jonathan Kenrikas, a former spokesperson for Israel during the beginning of the October 7th war. He can give us a unique look onto how anti-Israel and anti-Semitism has clouded the world's judgment, even weeks after the worst attack on our soil. Jonathan, what a pleasure to have you here. And
Shalom.
Shalom, shalom. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm happy to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. I am a private citizen today. I work at an American think tank called FDD. But in a bigger scale, I see myself who is fighting on behalf of the Jewish people, trying to bring different parts of the Jewish people together, and also trying to bring people who want to support the Jewish people, the state of Israel, provide them with information and access to what's going on in Israel these days. One of the biggest challenges we face today, beyond being surrounded by lots of enemies and people who want to kill us in the real world, is hatred and fake news and a lot of vitriol. And I feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to interact with people through international media, mainstream media, podcasts, or obviously social networks, and to give that Israeli perspective, which many times people don't get if they consume through mainstream media and sometimes even social media.
Now, a question some in our audience may have, they may be asking, why has Israel needed to fight this war instead of making peace a long time ago?
I think that's a fair question, and I understand a lot of people who grow up with ideals and who yearn for a utopian world where there's peace, no borders, love, and mutual respect between all of God's children. I wish that would be the case, but I'm old enough and experienced enough to understand that there are certain people in the world who don't share that vision. But after October 7, I think a lot of people have woken up and they understand that the other side, specifically Palestinians, they, from a mental and spiritual point of view, they are not there yet. They are not in a place where they say, you know what, we have come to terms and we accept the fact that the Jews live in this land and that it is their homeland. And that goes back to a very dark and deep hatred of Jews and of the modern state of Israel. When they'll accept it, I think that they'll find a willing partner in the Jews in Israel to make peace. Hopefully will happen in the future, maybe my children or my grandchildren. Until then, I assess that we will have to continue to be vigilant and fight.
I will say this, I think for perhaps many of our viewers who are Bible-believing people, they would say that they would recognize this unexplainable hatred, as you say, because sometimes it's this, sometimes it's that the source may be spiritual, that Israel is hated not really because of who Israel is, but because of the God of Israel. That's what I mean by spiritual.
And I would agree. And I think that, you know, many times in scientific studies, where science ends, we many times find faith. You eventually have to believe in something because there are things that even modern science today cannot really explain, right? And I think I'm not entirely sure that anti-Semitism is that, but I think there's a very strong grounds to believe that because it defies a lot of logic. It isn't logical. Like when you look at the amount of attention that Israel gets, it is abnormal. We're a people fighting for our independence in our ancient homeland. Why do people care so much? And I think you're actually right. There's reason and logic, but then that ends, and eventually it's belief. And I think a lot of the hatred against Israel must be motivated by other things as well.
What word of advice would you have for our audience to combat misinformation at home?
That's a big challenge. And I go by the line that I shall bless those who bless Israel, and I should curse those who curse Israel. I think history lends a lot of examples to what eventually happens, what was the fate of many very powerful empires that sought to kill the Jews, undermine the Jews, expel them from their country, and eventually they're not around. Not the Romans, not Nebuchadnezzar, not Titus, and many others. They're in the history books, but the Jews are alive and well in their homeland. There's something, maybe spiritual, maybe something else, that has protected the Jewish people over the ages. That's one. Second one is that I think the enemies of Israel are the enemies of the West. Our issue is just that we're located in a rough neighborhood. To Americans, I can say that we're the off-Broadway show. The show eventually comes to Broadway. It eventually comes knocking on Christian doors, and just looking at what Israel is facing and understanding that eventually that'll come to attack them as well.
Jonathan, I want to thank you so much for sharing with us. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom. And our viewers, we are praying for you. And it was a great reminder of what God said to Abraham in Genesis 12 and verse 3. Those that bless you, I will bless, and those that curse you, I will curse. I want to thank you for standing with Israel on God's word, and we pray that God will richly bless you and your families. Opportunity comes with opposition, but our job is to focus on God and His vision, putting one foot in front of the other to walk out that vision. Paul often speaks of opposition to the preaching of the gospel, from Gentiles, from his Jewish brothers, and sometimes even people that call themselves believers. He frames it as a coordinated attack, not by people, but by the spiritual powers behind them. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood. How do we wrestle? Paul spent his energy in prayer, the scriptures, preaching, and building up the brothers. In other words, Paul wrestled by walking out the vision God gave him. As we'll see, the next step for Nehemiah's vision was to bring the people of Jerusalem together in unity to accomplish God's work of rebuilding. So we will ask the question, who is on your team next time as we walk the walls with Nehemiah?